Hey guys, I'm Charles Neal. Welcome to my shop. This is the first in a series of project videos that we're going to be putting up just for you. And the one we're going to start with is one we call the Shenandoah Valley Quilt Rack. The reason being, of course, we live here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and that's where the original, which is right here, was found. Now, as the story goes, my aunt and uncle, or aunt, ever how you say it, was at an auction at an old plantation house not too far from here. And this is going back, I don't remember if it was the late 40s, early 50s, I'm not sure. Anyway, this quilt rack was in there. And they bought it. And I got my hands on it. And the thing I found with it was, I have no real clue exactly how far back it goes, other than to tell you the mortises and tenons and everything in it are all hand chiseled and so forth, so on. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But the design of it was so unique. It actually has a very geometric or contemporary flavor to it. And it also works well in a period environment. It's been a staple in our gallery forever. I think we've been making them 15, 20 years, and we have sold a ton of them. Everybody likes them. It's a very simple build, and it's a weekend project, and I hope you like it. And we're going to take a look at different ways of making it. But first, let's take a little bit of a look at the actual quilt rack. Now the one right here, this is our version of it. Now what we did was we improved the lines on it a little bit. We made it taller and we made it wider to better accommodate the modern day quilts and so forth. You know, with a good finish on it, they also make a nice towel rack in a bathroom. Okay, let's take a look at the original. As I said, if you look right here, this was actually built, it's missing now, but it was built with a through tenon that came through the mortise that we'll see just in a second, and it was wedged. You know, when I originally took this apart, it was pretty easy to do because it was used old hide glue, was a little bit in here. And somewhere along the line, somebody had actually toenailed a little nail in here, so I guess it was kind of getting a little bit wiggly in the top. And you can see I don't know if you can really see it that well on camera, but all of this has been hand chiseled and so forth. And you can see in different areas and whatever on it, you can see what appears to be pretty coarse bandsaw marks or whatever. So I really can't date it. I don't know how old it is, but I know it goes back that far. And one of the most, like I said, I really like the design, but one of the more intriguing things about it was it's not something I would have expected to have seen even back to the 50s. I wouldn't have expected that. It goes back further than that. But it's made out of walnut. That's the original. Okay, it's a simple build. I told you that. So what we're going to do is build one. And we're going to show you how we do it. And we're going to give you the patterns. All right, guys, now the material that I've chosen to make this out of is cherry and poplar. Now, what I did with I didn't have any 8-quarter poplar. Well, actually I do, but I realized a lot of times you're not going to have an 8-quarter. And 8-quarter gets a little expensive. So what I did was I just took 2 pieces of 4-quarter, laminated them together. I jointed them, put them through the drum sander to make sure that I had really good surfaces that I could, when I glued it together, I got what I wanted. I glued them up, I don't know, 5.5 inches. Give me plenty of meat to work with. And the object of the game is when I'm done, I've got as an invisible glue seam as I can get. You know, lots of clamps, glue them up tight. Then for the cherry, I'm taking a piece of full 8/4. Now, one of the things I did, if you'll notice, I've got a nice red face, but on the back side, I got a lot of sapwood. Now, this is something I would avoid normally, and I feel sure you would too. But in today's world, where most often the sapwood is not considered a defect except in walnut, you're going to run into it. Now, I chose this because it's got a lot of sapwood, because I know it's going to give me some finishing issues. So I chose it so that we could address them. So that's the products that we're going to use in the material. Okay, what I've done is I've got everything processed. Now I took everything to a final of 1 5/8. Now the quilt rack's going to wind up at 1 1/2, but like I said, once I've got it all together, I'm going to put it through the drum sander and take it down to the final 1 1/2 inches. But no matter what you do, you want to make sure your wood is processed nice and flat. So what I did, because my piece of cherry was too wide for me to get across my 8-inch joiner, is I went and split it down the middle, jointed one edge, then I split it, and that gave me something I could better control. And I could get across the joiner. So I jointed one face flat, went to the planer, planed it to a strong 1 5/8. Then I came back, ran it through the drum sander, just to be sure, and on an 80 grit, and made sure everything was dead flat, and took it to a 1 5/8. And you can look, you can see this stack, it's flat, it's straight. Then what I did was I jointed the edge again, just to be sure that I was parallel. Then I came back and I ripped everything to the width I wanted. Now the foot is 3 1/2 inches tall. So I simply ripped my stock 3 1/2 inches. Now with that said, I made the feet, I always cut my feet stock just a little longer. I don't try to go to an exact size at this moment. And these are about 13 1/2. So these are now 13 1/2 long. They're 1 5/8 thick, and they're 3 1/2 inches tall. Now, what I did here, because I want to show you a couple different ways of doing this. I cut my poplar feet to the exact same length. But you're going to notice that the poplar pieces for the uprights is much shorter. Actually, they're just enough that I can get the upright out of. Now that's going to pose us a problem. And the problem that's going to pose us is that we don't have enough to make a tenon on it. So we're going to look at we're not going to tell nobody, but we're going to use some biscuits. But we're going to do it the good old-fashioned mortise and tenon way on the cherry one. Now the cherry one, I'm at 41 and a half. Now that's far bigger than what I need, longer. But I want to be able to have a setup option. In other words, what am I talking about? I want to use this end of it to use as a test setup when I go to cut my tenon. Now, if you're at a point your wood will only allow you can't get some extra, try to find something that you can make that's going to be the same width and thickness. Process it right along with everything else so you have a scrap piece that you can use for setup. It's a big difference between measuring everything and a literal ensuring everything. Okay, now what I'm doing now is I'm laying out for the mortise in the feet on the cherry. The mortise is going to be 2.5 inches, and it's going to be 5/8 of an inch wide, right here. Now the way I laid it out, I took my foot, and from this point to this point is 4 inches. So I drew a center line. I set it on my piece of wood to make sure that I could have plenty of wood to get my foot cut out of. Marked it, drew a center line. Then from the center line, I went 1.25 inches on both sides. Now when I did it, I set it up. Before I did that, I set it up and I marked it because I've definitely got a left and a right. So you notice this says out, same thing on that side. That's just my little note telling me that this is going to be the outside of the foot. Now there's something I'm going to show you that you're going to think a little strange maybe. I'm putting this sapwood on the outside of the quilt rack. You may think that it would be better to put it on the inside where it wouldn't be quite as visible. That's actually not the case. The reason I'm putting it on the outside is I've got a complete blank there. I don't have the rungs or anything to deal with. And I'm going to have to do some coloring technique here. And to be able to do it on the outside without any obstruction is going to be a whole lot easier to deal with than if I've got to try to work it all in around the rungs. That's simple. If I've got to do coloring on something, I want it where I can get to it. And it's the easiest for me to deal with. All right. So this is going to be my foot. I drew my center line, 1.25 inches on each side, which equates to 1.5 inches. 2.5, I'm sorry. Then I came back, marked the center line, found my dead center of this. Then, once I had my center marked, then I measured 5/16, which is half of 5/8 to the right of it or left of it, doesn't matter. Then I simply set a combination square to it, to that point, and marked it. Now, I use these gel rollers all the time, or gel pens, whatever you want to call them. They got a pretty fine tip, but they're wide enough that you need to decide whether you're leaving the line or taking the line. But all right, now we're ready to mortise it. Now I'm going to mortise this on my stationary mortiser. I'm going to use a 3/8 chisel, and I'm going to mortise one side, then I'm going to flip it around and mortise the other side. That will, in other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in this way, then I'm going to flip it and go the other way, and that's going to ensure my mortise is dead center in my piece of wood. Now, you could just as well just take go to a drill press or even a hand drill and drill this out, take a chisel and chisel it. Now, I'm going to make this mortise 1 inch deep. That's a little deep. But the reason I'm going to do it is that I'm going to peg this joint so that you can see it. And you'll see the benefit of that after a little bit. Now, I want to lay this out on my upright because there's something that can happen. This piece of material is cut at 4.5 inches. So that means I'm going to mark a center at 2 1/4. And if I mark, and I've got my center line denoted on my foot. Now you'll notice my sapwood's up on both sides. Writing out on there. Okay. Now, when I squared this up, these ends, the way I did it was on a table saw with a miter slide. I've got a chop saw and other things. I prefer, when I can, to cross cut on a table saw. The rotation of the blade and everything will give me as smooth and nice a cut as I can get. Okay, now what I used, I think, was a 60-tooth carbide or something. Here's my center line, but I could get an issue here. Always check this. I'm going to set my foot pattern on here, making sure that the way it's going to set, and I'm going to set it center line to center line. Then I've got a center line marked on my upright, and I'm going to line it up. But I've got an issue. And my issue is right here at this back edge, I'm probably about a 1/16 of an inch from my pattern having enough. In other words, the pattern's hanging over about a 1/16. Now that's the reason you always want to cut this member a little bit wide. And the reason that it's in a pure square and everything's equal is so we can cut the tenons much easier. But here's what I can do. If you can see right here, I've got some space. In other words, I'm wider than my foot. I'm 4.5, my foot is 4. So I've got a little bit of room to play. If I actually move this way, then I can get that to come in and make sure it's in a line, make sure I've got enough room to get my cut. I'm good right there. I've got about 1/8 of an inch overhanging. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to denote this as being my center line. Now once that's done, I also want to translate that to where my mortise is going to come in. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm setting this up and I'm going to lay out, I'm going to mark where my mortise is going to have to be. And you'll notice in this case it's an offset. In other words, this is deeper than this. It's not going to be an issue. All I'm going to have to do when we cut the tenon is just adjust that depth, and we'll come in just fine. But always make sure you're going to get what you want. Now while we're on that, I'm going to show you something with the biscuit one. There's another way of doing this, and I talked about the biscuits. Oftentimes, as in the case with that big 10-inch piece of cherry that we cut up, if you've got a piece, these things can have a lot of waste to them. If you've got something like that, you can actually come in here. Let's assume this is one piece of wood. And I've oftentimes been able to come in and draw it out like this, then maybe have to flip it and come in like this, and I can get 2 uprights out of a whole lot less wood. That simple. Saves a lot of wood. And in doing that, a lot of times, depending on the width, I'm able to come back in and get a foot and a foot. Saves a ton of wood. But when I do that, in order to do that, I've got to rough saw this out. So I don't have a nice square piece of wood in order to be able to make the tenon on it nicely. And in the same token, sometimes a piece of wood is not going to be long enough. So how do you handle it? I'm going to show you. Now remember, we're going to be biscuiting. So here's what I can do. If I've got a piece cut out, now this is going to work out because we're the same width. But assuming for a moment, we all know about that assume thing. But let's just think about this a minute. If I'm trying and I've got a pattern and this is just roughed out, and this thing is actually trying to, I can't get it. Like in other words, it's setting like this or whatever. I can simply saw this on an angle, which will twist it one way or the other and allow me, see for example, where this is hanging over. If this were just a roughed out piece and this is hanging over, by cutting a little angle here, that's going to take this, throw it back, and allow me to get my upright cut. Pretty simple. And bearing in mind that we're going to biscuit this, it's going to be pretty easy to go together. Okay, I hope you understood that. All right, I'm going to go now and I'm going to mortise these two pieces of cherry for the feet. After we do that, then we're going to cut the tenons. Or as a friend of mine used to call them, we're going to cut them pinions. I don't know where he got that. Pinions. Okay? Let's go mortise. All right, all I'm doing now is just cleaning up the bottom a little bit and making sure my sides are decent and nice and all that good stuff. You know, I've cut mortises just about every way you can think of. Routers and chisels, and man, I've drilled and chiseled more mortises than I care to think of. So ever how you do it, just try to make sure it's center. And remember, we're 5/8 by an inch deep. Okay. Mortises. They'll do. Let's make some tenons. In a hurry to do this, what I did was, when I cut my mortise, I'm actually about 15/16. I'm not quite at an inch. But it's not going to matter because it's going to all come off in the length anyway. But that's important because I don't want to have to be messing with it. So, now what I'm going to do, a place to start is I've got my dado blade and I'm going to set it on my saw, and I've got the highest tooth set right at the edge of my mortise. They should put me pretty close. So I'm going to measure this, make sure I'm at, to my outside edge, I'm at 15/16. If I'm a little hair less than that, that's a good thing. That being about a 32nd. That's going to give me a little bit of glue relief down in there, and it's going to make sure that puppy socks down nice and tight. Now I'm going to make a test cut to make sure on my depth. But before I do that, there's something else I want to do. Always, always, double check, keep a check, make sure that you're square. Make sure you're square to your fence. And of course, common sense says you got to make sure you're square on your blade. In other words, the space from here to here and here to here is the same. Okay, we're going to cut it. Now all I'm going to do, now this is my good end, so I'm just taking a little bit up here off the top where I've got the extra just to confirm what I need to do. Now in the event you don't have, I'm pretty snug there. In the event that you don't have a dado blade, you can do the exact same thing. It takes a little longer. You can take a saw blade and just nibble it off. All right, I'm gonna raise this just a little bit. All right, now I'm going to make sure that I can get my pattern. If y'all hear a bunch of rumbling, there's a bad storm going on outside. Everything's going to work, everything's going to fit. This is my center line. And what I'm translating is my center line off of my mortise. Then I'm going to also trace on here, mark on here. And you can see, again, this is narrower and this is wider. I'm kind of using the same exact technique. I'm just going to eyeball this and try not to get, because I don't want to move my fence. So I'm going to eyeball this. I can also draw a line on the end of the mortise to get it translated a little better. Just remember one thing. Raising the blade takes more off, lowering it leaves it on. You can always take a little more off. That add-on thing, that gets to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, I'm going to check where I'm at. my problem here is I'm a little bit tight, a little too tight. You want a tenon where you can tap it together. Basically, you don't want to have to drive it and beat it. That's too tight. Because you do that, then you pretty much lose a lot of your glue effect. So I'm going to take a little shoulder plane. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. Just reduce the thickness of it just a little bit. All right. I'm okay on width. I'm still a little bit fat right here. Still on? Okay. Little chisel, little rasp. Just make sure it's going together nice. Still a little snug up here at the top. Now, I want to show you this. Whether it was me, whether I'm a little teeny bit, there's a little teeny, in other words, shoulder right here. And that's where, when I came through this way, it cut just a little more. It could have been whoever, whatever. It can happen. So how do you handle something like that? Because it's going to give us a gap in there. Well, that's where a little shoulder plane can really, really help you. Here's the trick. Take the end of the tenon and kind of do a little back bevel on it, just a little bit. It's not going to hurt our strength because it's going to give it, but what that's going to do is allow me to lay this in here a little bit on the side. And I can just simply clean it up, blend them together. It's also doing a little back angle on this, which allows me to sneak up on this final edge here. I can do the same thing a little bit with the rasp, but I don't want to do it straight. I want to do just a little bit of an angle. Now that's a trick that a lot of guys know about in fitting. You know, when you really got to get it really, really tight, is you do a little bit of a back cut right in here. You just pare out a little bit of that material, and it kind of gives a little bit of a glue space as well. But the other thing that it does is that it makes the outer perimeter of the fit be extremely tight. Now I don't want to get too carried away with this because I'm at 1 5/8 inches and I'm going to be taking about 1/16 of an inch off on both sides of this. So I don't want to get this, if I back cut it a little bit, I want to keep a good heavy shoulder up here, because when I sand it, if I don't, I can actually create a gap. Understand that? I think so. How am I looking? That'll do. Now, just to be sure, let me get my full-size pattern here and make sure. Y'all gonna have to tell me, can I get it? Am I gonna get it all in? Oh yeah, easy, not a problem. All right, one down. All right, I'm gonna get the other one done, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna look at the biscuiting. Now to the biscuit. This is just too easy. But I'm gonna tell you up front, it works good. The modern day glues really help. Same thing applies. Make sure you're lined up and you can get your cut. Now, one biscuit is just not going to do it. So what I'm doing is I'm just getting myself a center line. But the center line is you're going to need it just to make sure when you glue up that you've got your orientation right. Now with this poplar one of the things is that I'm not going to have to worry too much about ins and outs and lefts and rights, because it's going to do it. And that's because this is square. Now, if I, like we was talking about, if I'd cut this out of something of a wide piece and I wasn't square and level, square and flat in a square section, had been pre-cut pretty close, then I would really want to pay attention to that left and right. And just keep it in mind, you've got a left and you've got a right. All right. All I got to do now is biscuit it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a number 20 biscuit, and I'm going to set it about a ½ inch, I'd say about 3/8 of an inch below the surface. Okay, so you know how that works. So I'm going to biscuit it and get to it. Now I'm going to cut all my 2 biscuits. Then I'm going to come back and I'm actually going to drop it down close to the center, making sure I stay from the same top, and I'm going to cut a 3rd one. Now, one of the things about using the biscuit is that you don't have a tremendous amount of stress here. You just don't. And so I don't have an issue with it. It's going to hold, and it's going to hold well. I can tell you from experience, I've never had an issue with the ones I did. Never. And I've done a good many of these. Now the other thing is that when we go, when you cut these things out, try to keep a nice something up here on top that's flat and down here. And the reason for that is when we clamp this together, we want something that we can get a good bite on. Bear that in mind. All right. Like I said, this is just way too easy. Makes them fast. What I'm doing is, let me tell you something. What would you do if your mortise or your tenon got a little too sloppy? Well, you know, we all know about gluing a little sliver of wood or something on there to build it back. That works excellent. And it's an extremely strong way of doing it. But I'm going to tell you another little way of doing it. Use a little body filler. Make sure you wipe it on, get it really tight on your wood. Holds great. Really does. I know. What? Try it. All right, now, I'm going to drop down and hit that middle. But I want to be careful here because I want to, you know, I'm not going to drive myself crazy and try to make sure I'm absolutely positively dead in the center of this thing. As long as I've got the same orientation, meaning I'm coming off of the same surface, it's not going to matter. And here's what I mean. I'm going to put this together this way. Then this and this is my surface that I'm going to be indexing off of. Yep. That's close, but it's not perfect in the center. But like I said, as long as I'm coming off the same surface, it's not going to matter. Do you need 3 biscuits? I don't know. Never had one break. Never had a failure, so I can't tell you. Little dry fit, and that'll work. All right. Now I'm going to tell you another thing. I tried this years ago and never had a problem. Tell you what else I did. I put a couple together, and what I did was, this is an end grain. Make sure you size it. Now, what does sizing mean? Sizing, just simply take you some glue and wipe real hard. Wipe it on that end grain. Push it in there. Seal it in good. Give it just a little bit to set up. One of the problems with gluing end grain is that the end grain will just suck the glue up. And there's nothing there for it to really bond. That's why a flat grain holds so well, because it doesn't suck up the glue like the end grain. If you size it by putting a thin coat on it before you do, now I'll tell you a nice way of doing it, because it can also swell that end grain a little bit and make it coarse and kind of try to affect your fit. Put it together, put a clamp on it, put some glue on there, clamp it just on the end grain. Give it just a few minutes, 5 minutes or so. Pull it apart, then glue the whole thing. That forces that glue up into that end grain, fills it up so that when you do your final glue, it doesn't absorb all of your glue, and you get a really, really tight bond. So that's what I did. But I knew that was not going to be sufficient. I wasn't going to do that. So what I did was I put it together just like that, glued it let it dry. Then I came back and I sneaked underneath here and I drilled up in it until I got about a ½ inch or an inch up in here rather, and put me some 3/8 inch dowels up in it. I still got the quilt rack. I kept it just because I wanted to see what it did, and it ain't never done nothing. It's holding great. And of course the dowels are hidden up underneath, and when you sand your foot underneath there, they kind of go away. So it's a lot of ways you can make this joint. All right, we've got our biscuits. We're now ready to glue. Before I do, one of the things I want to do just to make life easier is I want to go ahead and bandsaw it. Now, bandsawing it is going to mean that all I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rough out. I'm not going to try to get perfect at this point. I want to give myself some room, but I'm just going to take a little bit of this out of here and this so that, and I'm going to leave plenty of room, because what I'm after is it's just going to be easier for me to deal with it than having to deal with this foot but on here to do the final bandsaw. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that top square and I'm going to leave this foot square, like I talked about, just for this is an area, just don't even keep that heavy. We've got an end grain situation right here and right here. And bandsawing and whatever, if we get this real thin, like it is in this piece of plywood, you can break it until it's glued in, until it's well glued. That said, when you glue this, make sure you get plenty of glue out here. All right? So I don't even mess with that till the last. I rarely go to my actual size on anything until the last possible minute. I'm going to leave myself plenty of room, glue it up. I'm just going to take some of that out so it'll be easier to maneuver. And then I'm going to make me, like you've seen, I've got a ½ inch MDF full-size pattern. That's what I'm going to use when it's all said and done. That's what I'm going to lay on here and cut everything by. Now, the way we're going to cut them out is we're going to bandsaw them. I'm going to take it and I'm going to use we're going to use a flush trim bit on the router and pattern cut it that way. And then we're also going to use drum sander and just sand them to the line. Not real difficult. Okay, I'm going to bandsaw these a little bit and get to gluing. All right, I got one more to bandsaw, but I wanted to let you know that's the reason I wanted to show you the biscuit thing, and I wanted to show you about using a wide piece and going ahead and rough cutting it out beforehand, because it does save a lot of wood. And as you can see, doing it in the square like this, it's a lot of waste comes off. And I'm just like you, I'm not a fan of wasting wood. So every time I cut something out and I've got waste, I keep looking at it. It bothers me. All right, this is that sizing thing. I'm just working glue really good into that end grain. All right, we're going to get this thing glued up. Now I'm going to tell you something else too. My clamps don't look like all of them. they got I've used mine time or 10,000. So we'll just have to deal with it. Now here's something I'm going to show you, and that's the main part of this, is that a lot of times what you're going to do, kind of set them sideways, because this being wide like it is, or thick, sometimes with a biscuit or any of it, you're going to find that you may have to clamp it from both sides. Just the pressure, even though on a pipe clamp, this isn't necessarily a parallel surface. So if you put the clamp all the way down, it can put more pressure on one point than another. That's the reason when I'm gluing up panels, I always alternate. I always do the one up, one down, one up this way, one down this way. I've never been able to just lay them down flat and glue them. See what I'm talking about? Look right here. See where that's wanting to open just a little bit? Okay. We're square. That's not the issue. That's not the problem. The problem is in the clamp. So I just hit them both ends. And it's going to close up nicely. Yep. That's that one. Now, just so you ain't going to sit here and watch me glue this stuff forever. Told you I don't glue real politely. Tell you something else too. Because I'm going to be cleaning this all down and whatever. I glue them. Now this edge right here now cherry is a little denser than poplar. So it's not going to suck up the glue quite as bad. Pine's one of the worst. And oak, red oak, white oak, as coarse grained as they are, ash, man, them guys will just, ooh. Them boys drink glue like a drunk on Saturday night, I'm telling you. Now I'm just using a good old wood glue. Yeah, I know I should have had a rag. That's the first time that ever happened. It's a good thing I cut that foot oversized because it just dented it. Y'all know that Murphy's Law thing? It's alive here too, buddy. It does well. Let's see. We have to change a little bit here. All right. It's not taking a lot, comes right in. Yeah, I know, I got a mess. It'll be all right come morning. All right, get them glued up. And I'm gonna let them dry overnight. Now, I could, on this cherry one, I could go ahead and I'll show you that. I'm just going to go, it's been a long day and I'm just going to call it a day, and let them dry overnight. Now what I could do is I could actually peg that joint and keep right on going. I've done it many a time. You know, a lot of the old antiques and whatever, those things, they didn't have a drop of glue in them. They were purely pegged together. And I've worked on that stuff that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. Still going strong, still holding. So, you know, that peg mortise and tenon, that's a hard joint to beat. And if somewhere down the line, 200 or 300 years from now, if that glue decides to let go and we've got a peg joint, nobody's going to know. The modern day adhesives, I don't think it's going to be the case. And just like the biscuits, you know, the biscuit is a form of a mortise and tenon. It's kind of like a loose tenon joint. And you know, with that said, here's a little key. Any good woodworking joint, whether it be a dovetail, mortise and tenon, a biscuit, a loose tenon, even a dowel, the one common thing, you've got to have a male and female. It has to be that way. And when you have that is in a joint, you can pretty much be assured that you've got a good joint. And in both cases, that's what we have. All right, I'm gonna glue up the other two, and when we come back, these puppies will be dry and we'll get on with the program. All my glue's dry, got them out of clamps, scraped off the worst of my glue, and I told you I want to peg these joints. I want to peg these mortises and tenons. But to do that, I got to make some peg material. Now I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch bit, so I want my pegs to be 1/4 inch. Now you can use a 1/4 inch round dowel. That's a given. However, if you go back and look in nice old period furniture, historical stuff, you're going to notice it's always done with a square peg. What's kind of cool about a square peg, and this is just personal observation, I've rarely ever seen a joint crack or split that a square peg was used in. I've very often seen them split that a round peg was used in. What's the difference? Well, a square peg actually holds on the corners, and it allows for just a little bit of expansion and contraction in there. Not only that, but it looks nice, okay? Square pegs, round holes. If you're a psychiatrist, you probably won't agree with that, but if you ever give me a test, I'm gonna show you how to get them in there, and I'm gonna show you. But in order to do it, first thing we need is some square peg material. So I'm gonna show you how I cut it. The first thing I do is I've just got a piece 7/8 inch stock, just some scrap. But one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure I got a good push stick that comes all the way down. And you'll see why just in a minute. So that when this goes through the saw blade and I've got that little teeny 1/4 inch stick coming off, when I push it all the way through, this push block is going to carry it past the blade. And I'm not going to wind up having this thing kicking back on me. But the first thing you're going to notice, in order to do that, I've got my splitter removed, okay? I've just got the blade, and I've got it just set up just high enough to get my piece out. Let's take a look at how I do it. Don't forget to turn on the dust collector. Works nice and it's safe. Okay, let's go over here and peg some pieces. Joints. Okay guys, now due to technical difficulties, we get to show you how to peg this foot or this tenon again. Now, the peg in this is 5/8 of an inch on center from the seam. That's right at the shoulder joint. I'm 5/8 of an inch down, and I'm 1.5 inches on center, making sure that I pass through my tenon really well. Now, what you want to do is just take either a stop collar, or in this case, I just use some blue tape, and mark your drill bit so that you don't come all the way through. And in this case, I'm holding back about 1/4 inch from coming through. Now, like I said, if you're using a 1/4 inch bit, use a 1/4 inch peg. Okay. One of the things when you're pegging something, we talked about rounding up your peg a little bit on the end. Now I'm just going to use a piece of scrap wood to show you, is drill your hole. Now a brad point bit or a little Forstner bit's the best. Something with a center guide that's going to cut a nice clean hole. And once you've done that, glue in your peg. One of the problems you can encounter if you put a bunch of glue in here, what's going to happen is you're going to create a hydraulic effect. What am I talking about? When you drive the peg in, that glue is a liquid. It's going to try to expand. It can split wood. So you want to take something that you've sanded round a little bit that'll get down in the hole, coat the sides, but not leave a big puddle in there. Then simply take a little bit of glue on a glue brush and just lightly paint the peg. Then simply drive it home. Now, I've seen a lot of guys try to do this using a mallet. Mallets don't work very well. The reason being, the soft head of the mallet will bounce. And all of that bounce and vibration can cause you to split out. Now, another good idea is if you're pegging your stretchers up in here, is to keep a clamp going across it. That keeps the pressure here so that when you drive your peg, it's not going to try to split. Trim your peg off, sand it flush, you're good to go. Not difficult, but sure makes a good strong joint. Now, I'm cleaned up and I'm down to, actually I'm a 16th large. And I'm going to leave it that way until I get them all cut out. And like I said, I rarely go to final size until the last minute. And once I've got them all cut out and sanded and whatever, then I'll run them back through the drum sander and take them down to final thickness. You know, this isn't a commercial for a drum sander. But I will tell you this much. Of any single tool that I have that has helped me in my woodworking, it has to be the drum sander. We've been running them now for, 15 years or so better. And prior to that, I got planers and all of that. But the drum sander for flattening, leveling, these are just as dead flat and level, smooth, easy, reduction in sanding time and everything else. You know, they just, you know, smooth surfaces, flat, level, no snipe. They're really, really an excellent tool to have in your shop if you can afford one. Okay, I'm going to show you one other thing on the pegging. Now remember I said if we drill it all the way through and the peg comes out, it's going to show round. And that's true. The other thing is you can wind up getting some, you know, always want a biker board if you're going to drill all the way through. Otherwise you can get some tear out on the back. But once you put the peg in, if you want it to look like it's got pegs going all the way through, simply go to the back of it and drill you a shallow hole. Shallow meaning, you know, 1/4 of an inch, something like that. Now here's another thing you can do. Once you've drilled your hole, this is a 1/4 inch mortising bit, just a hollow mortising bit. Make sure you line up the edges of your hole. Use a mallet so you don't damage this, so you can still use it in your mortising. Chisel it out, get your square hole, a little bit of glue. Tap it in, cut it off. Looks just like you got a peg going all the way through. Works nice. Okay, now one of the things I might mention here is that I put my pegs visible on the outside. I also did the poplar ones. I know. I told you it was just aesthetic, just for the look. All right, do you have to do the pegs? Certainly not. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out my pattern and bandsaw it. Now one of the things I'm going to do, and on your pattern, you're going to find 3 holes. These are actually where the mortise is going to go for the crossbar. And what I'm going to do is, so that I stay exactly where I want, is I'm going to go ahead and screw this on. And then I'm going to trace it out, remove it, and do the others. Now I could just as easy leave it on and go straight to my shaping if I was going to do it on the router. These big holes right here are for use when we get to doing the router cut, and these are just 3/4 inch holes that are drilled for me to slide a 3/4 inch dowel in for me to hold when I'm doing this on the router. Just a safety thing. Okay, I'm going to get some screws, screw this down, trace it out, bandsaw it, leaving the line. Okay, what do I want to leave? Maybe a 1/16 at the most. Okay, so we'll do that, bandsaw them out, and come back and do the final shapes. Okay, I forgot to mention something. When you're doing that, make sure that you screw this on to what will be your inside. I just about screwed this thing on to my outside, and I don't want to do that. Now I'm just using a little washer-headed 3/4 square drive screw, or round head, whatever you want to call it, pan head, just something to hold it. Once you've laid out and you're drilling for these holes, what you're going to notice is that this top hole is centered. This hole actually carries back just a little bit to the back, and then this one is centered. Pretty much that simple, but I want you to notice something, and this is about when we round this over, and I'm going to show you this again, but I want to make sure you get it, is we don't want huge roundovers on this, because if we do, when our bar goes in, our cross piece, then this roundover is going to make us look like we've got a gap in our joint, and we don't want that. Okay. get my little gel marker here. I like these. They give me a nice, really dark line. Nothing against the pencil. Now, what would you do in the event that after doing all of this, you couldn't get your pattern to line up and you needed to move one way or the other? Well, here's what you can do. Situate it to where it's going to work for you. And you're going to find that you're going to wind up not flush on the bottom of one of these feet, okay? Simply trim your foot to match so you can get it, and then make sure your other profile or your other side upright, you just make it match. It'll come right out for you. I ain't gonna tell y'all how I know that, but I know it to be true. All right, bandsaw time. All right, guys, I was about getting ready to have to show you how to adjust that foot thing. Ooh, I was getting kind of close up here. I got it, but make sure you leave yourself plenty of meat to work with. Now, as I'm bandsawing these, if you can't see, what I'm using is just I'm using a 1/4 inch bit. I'm using a 1/4 inch blade. I find an 1/8 is too, they try to wander too much on me in some of this because of the long cuts. I find a 1/4 is about the best. Anything wider, heavier, it's not going to want to make some of the radiuses. And even though a lot of times, and you'll notice if I'm bandsawing, I take a lot of the waste out before I try to make a radius go around it. I don't want to get myself in a lot of pinch. And what I'm talking about is if you're bandsawing like up here, if you will take and just, make a straight cut down through here, come in, and then just remove some of the worst of this, and this isn't a real tight radius, but as you're coming around, if the blade tries to flex a little bit or pinch, it's not a heavy amount of wood out here to cause it to really get itself in a bind. It can actually the wood will actually move a little bit with it and give it a little bit of room to move. All right, we're going to router cut this. Now here's what I got. I've got a 1/2 inch down cut spiral bit with a bearing on top. Now, router cutting is just a wonderful thing to do, but we have to watch out for certain things. When we did our router DVD, we went through a lot of this because there's places you can have issues, and one of them is in the quilt rack. If you will notice, and I mentioned this earlier, right here is an area where we've got a vertical grain going to the flat grain. This area right here is that's why we wanted plenty of glue, because we want to make sure this is attached well. But since this bit is rotating in this direction, when that bit comes up right there on that joint, it can try to chip that. It's real prone to it. So the way I handle it is I simply, on my flat grain, go ahead, router cut it. When I get to this point, I skip over. And then I sand it. Okay, now the other thing is when I come back this way on it, I've got basically the same situation. I've got vertical grain running this way. So the top of this is all in grain. Coming into a flat. That's where they're prone to chip out the worst. And I mean, I've seen them on really split prone woods, you know, ashes, oaks, and whatever. I've seen it just try to take a big hunk out. Now that said, one of the things you want to do is make sure you're not trying to remove too much material. All right. The other thing is, what I did is I went over here to my sander and I sanded this as close to that as I can get, because removing a small amount of material with the router in router cutting is the key. The other thing you want to do is, typically your spiral cuts are made out of solid carbide, particularly the smaller ones. Carbide, while it's extremely sharp, holds a wonderful edge and is extremely strong, it also has a tendency to be brittle. That being the case, it's not going to flex as much as a high-speed steel. That being the case, you don't want to exert a tremendous amount of pressure. Okay, because you can break the bit. Now the other bit that we often use on this is, well, it's called a downshear flush trim. And if you look at it very carefully, it's basically a straight bit, except that all of the cutting flutes on it are actually set on a skew. Meaning that, if you don't understand that, they cut, you know, on an angle, so that it's not a vertical shear going on that can actually cause it to catch and jerk. Now the other thing is, you don't want really sharp edges from your bandsawing in something that this bit can catch very hard. Now a lot of you know what climb cutting is. Climb cutting is simply cutting in reverse. Okay? That's not a real safe thing to do, particularly with a bit of this size. So just for fun, what we're going to do is I'm going to cut this one out with the spiral. Then we're going to switch to this bit, the double fluted, and we'll just take a look at them, just purely for your information. Now my bit rotation is going this way, counterclockwise. So when I run it, you always want to run into the bit. In other words, you want to have to push the wood in. If you do it the other way, then the bit is trying to create a track, like the cleats on a bulldozer or on a tank or something. They're going to try to pull the wood into itself, and that can be dangerous. Okay. Always make sure you've got really something good to hold on to, and you've got a good flat surface. Now, all of that said to say, the other thing is, normally we have some dust collection set up, but I can't do that and show it to you too. So we're just going to have to make do. The other thing I've got is I've got a starter pin here. That's just for stability. That's just to help me be able to, when I'm running this, to have a start point that I can ease into. The other thing you want to do is make sure that the edge of your pattern is nice and smooth, because this bit is going to translate to your to your wood, whatever shape you've got. If you've got dips and whatever in it, it's going to translate that. Okay, that can be an issue, and particularly if you're using plywood. Plywood, you know, a lot of times you're going to see voids and things like that in there, and it doesn't want to create a really nice smooth edge. You want a nice sanded edge. If you have voids and issues, or if you mess up your pattern, remember what I told you about fixing that mortise? Well, it works real good here. You can simply take a little bit of auto body filler and repair and make sure that your pattern is nice and smooth. Works nice. Let's cut this thing. I think I need to lower my bit just a mite, just a little, anyway. Now you'll notice on this transition point, the one I told you I normally avoid, I came right on past it and went ahead and cut it. Now the reason I was able to do that is the rotation of that bit is cutting this way, it's cutting down on it. My problem in possibly chipping that edge is going to be when on this side, when I'm coming up into it, and the bit is trying to take the wood this way. That's where I would have the issue. See, it's a reverse thing. Now the other thing you're going to notice, I did not try to turn that corner. That's a sand thing. We can sand that. Okay, that's easy enough. Now I'm going to remove my starter pin here just so I can show you a little better. And the reason I can get by with that is my feet are flush, so I've got a place to start that I'm not going to be biting right in. And by that what I mean is I'm not going to be engaging wood here. Now, you're going to also notice, I told you again, on this top, I did not router cut it. I'm going to sand that. Same way with my points. Okay, that's decent. All right, I'm going to switch gears now and go to the other one, and I'm going to switch bits, just so we can see. Okay, I've switched bits. I also went and got me a dust mask. Whew. Without that dust collector hooked up, wear your dust mask. All right, same thing applies, except I'm going to be completely opposite, meaning that my issue is going to be coming in here, and I want to come in real gentle and real easy. Okay, don't try to take a whole lot off when you're router cutting. It just opens you up to not getting smooth cuts and not getting and having issues. Okay. One last thing. I think over there I told you I was using a 5/8 inch screw, and that worked because for whatever reason somewhere along the line I countersunk one side of this. I did not do it on the other side, so I had to jump to 1 1/4 inch screw. So just so you know. All right, I got two issues. One issue was I got a chip under that and rocked. Didn't stay down tight. And I think you saw on that foot a chip where it chipped. And it wouldn't have mattered which bit I had. So I got me a little ugly spot. Now how am I going to take care of that? It's real simple. One of the things that I want in this is I want a really nice flow line. I want this thing to flow well. I don't want lumps, bumps, or anything. So all I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to simply blend this out in my sanding. I'm not going to fill it. That would show. Well, maybe not a lot, but it's just going to be easier for me to go ahead and flow this out. I went ahead and ran this like I told you not to, so that you can see a little bit. See right here, I got a little bit of chip right here. That's what can happen at that joint. The other thing I did, see here on the bottom of my foot, I got a little chip. Okay, that I'm going to have to fill. I also had my pattern off just a little bit, and I got a little bit here on the bottom of my foot. I'm going to have to take care of that as well. But we can do all of that. Okay, we're going to come back, and I'm going to go ahead and do the cherry ones. And then the one cherry one, I'm not going to router cut because I'm going to show you how to do it, shape it a different way.